September 2, 2025. A drone strike killed 11 men off the Venezuelan coast. Officially, it is described as a blow against narco-terror. But beneath the headlines, oil reserves and disputed elections fuel a rivalry decades in the making. With United States missiles flying, was this really about drugs, about sovereignty, or about something strategically bigger? What happens when the world's largest oil prize becomes a front line in a shadow war? The answers begin here. Venezuela sits atop the world's largest proven crude oil reserves, a resource so vast that it shapes not just the country's economy, but the balance of global energy markets. Yet extracting this heavy, sulfur-rich crude is no simple task. Decades of underinvestment, outdated technology, and the loss of foreign partners have left much of the oil underground, even as the world's appetite for energy grows. For years, oil revenue fueled government budgets and social programs, but it also made the nation deeply vulnerable to swings in global prices and foreign pressure. Political divisions run just as deep. In July 2024, Venezuela's presidential election became a flashpoint. The government declared Nicolas Maduro the winner with 51.2% of the vote, while opposition groups published results showing a landslide in their favor. The outcome fractured the country's institutions and drew sharp condemnation from abroad, especially from Washington. The United States and the European Union refused to recognize the result, citing irregularities and accusations of authoritarian rule. With diplomatic channels closed and trust between governments shattered, Venezuela's oil became more than a commodity. It became leverage in a struggle over legitimacy and influence. This standoff set the stage for a new kind of confrontation, where the fate of a nation's resources and the credibility of its leaders are fought over on the world stage. U.S. leaders began to redefine the confrontation with Venezuela as something far more than a dispute over oil or politics. In official statements, the language shifted. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth declared that Venezuelan traffickers would be treated the same as al-Qaeda. He warned that if you are a narco-terrorist smuggling drugs in our hemisphere, we will map your networks, track your people, hunt you down, and kill you. The Trump administration designated the Tren de Aragua gang as a foreign terrorist organization, claiming it operated under the direct control of President Nicolas Maduro. This framing drew on the playbook developed after September 11th, equating drug smuggling with acts of terror and casting Venezuela as a national security threat rather than a diplomatic adversary. By labeling criminal groups as narco-terrorists and tying them to the highest levels of government, Washington created a legal and political rationale for military action. Strikes on suspected drug vessels, sometimes hundreds of miles from U.S. waters, were justified as counter-terror operations, not acts of war. The new narrative blurred the line between law enforcement and warfare, building public support for measures that once would have required congressional approval or international debate. At sunrise on September 2, 2025, a USM Q-9 drone tracked a small vessel in the Caribbean, just outside Venezuelan waters. The Pentagon said the boat was carrying narcotics for Tren de Aragua, a group newly labeled as terrorists by Washington. Without warning, a missile struck the hull, tearing the boat apart and killing all 11 people on board. The official statement called it a precision counter-narcotics operation. There were no survivors, no public identification of the dead, and no independent observers to confirm what the vessel was carrying or who was on it. The only evidence offered, a grainy satellite image and a Pentagon press release, was enough for U.S. officials to declare success. For families in Venezuela, there was only silence and unanswered questions. 11 lives ended in a single moment, far from any courtroom or due process. The strike set a new precedent. Lethal force deployed on suspicion alone, justified by a war on drugs, now recast as a fight against terrorism. In the days that followed, the sense of what was possible and what was permissible had changed. The boundary between law enforcement and warfare blurred, and the stakes for anyone on the water had never been higher. By late October 2025, the campaign had grown far beyond a single drone strike or an isolated incident. Pentagon officials confirmed at least 20 separate operations targeting small vessels in both the Caribbean and the Pacific. Each strike was authorized under new rules that allowed lethal force based on classified intelligence, no warning, no trial, just a sudden flash of violence at sea. The White House released figures showing more than 80 deaths in less than 3 months. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth described the campaign as relentless and promised that traffickers would be hunted day and night. Behind the scenes, President Trump signed a covert order in mid-October, giving the CIA authority to operate inside Venezuela's borders, an escalation that blurred the line between intelligence gathering and direct action. U.S. officials insisted these were surgical strikes against narco-terrorists, but the pace and reach of operations told a different story. Targets shifted from the Caribbean to the Pacific, and nighttime raids became routine. The normalization of force was no longer debated, it was measured in the growing tally of destroyed boats and lost lives. For decision-makers in Washington, the logic was simple. Keep up the pressure and expand the campaign, even as questions about evidence and legality faded into the background. On December 10, 2025, United States Special Forces boarded a Venezuelan oil tanker off the coast, acting under orders from the aircraft carrier Gerald R. Ford. The operation was swift. Armed personnel seized the vessel, citing violations of United States sanctions tied to alleged narco-terrorism. No shots were fired, but the message traveled fast. Washington was no longer limiting itself to strikes at sea. Venezuela's last economic lifeline had become a military target. The tanker seizure came after months of tightening pressure. In February, the United States revoked Chevron's license to operate in Venezuela, cutting off the final direct connection between American energy companies and Venezuelan crude. By March, punitive tariffs hit any country that dared to buy Venezuelan oil, driving away buyers and forcing Caracas to sell at deep discounts to a shrinking pool of willing partners. Each move intensified the squeeze. Sanctions alone had battered the economy, but now the campaign reached into the shipping lanes, seizing not just profits but the physical means to export oil at all. United States officials framed these actions as enforcement, not aggression. For Venezuelan leaders, the distinction was meaningless. With every boarded tanker and revoked license, the tools of war had shifted from missiles to markets, and the cost for Venezuela grew heavier with each passing day. Caracas responded to the mounting pressure by rewriting the rules of engagement. In December 2025, Venezuela's National Assembly passed a sweeping anti-blockade law, criminalizing any cooperation with foreign sanctions or blockades. The law threatened severe prison sentences for those accused of aiding outside efforts to choke the economy. Officials described it as a necessary defense against what they called economic warfare, but critics warned it could be used to silence dissent and punish political opponents. At the same time, President Maduro ordered the mobilization of the country's militia system. Official figures claimed 4.5 million volunteers stood ready to defend the homeland, a number that blended trained reservists with civilian supporters. The government staged mass exercises, parading militia units through city centers and broadcasting pledges of loyalty. The message was clear. Any foreign move against Venezuela would be met not just by the regular army, but by a population in arms. As the legal and military lines hardened, the world's major powers watched closely. Russian and Chinese diplomats issued statements backing Venezuela's sovereignty, warning against what they called unilateral aggression. Meanwhile, rumors spread online of a U.S. missile strike against a drug loading dock on Venezuelan soil. No independent evidence surfaced, but the claim added confusion to an already volatile situation. With each side testing limits and the facts increasingly blurred, the risk of a mistake with global consequences grew harder to ignore. Today, military strikes and oil seizures redefine the rules in the Caribbean. As gray zone warfare blurs fact and fiction, global stakes only sharpen. This is no distant struggle. Energy markets, alliances, and lives are in play now. The world holds its breath, waiting to see who blinks first.